Apologies. Good morning, everybody. My name is John McCarthy. I'm Senior Advisor and Director of Strategic Partnerships for the Piedmont Environmental Council. That is the sort of title you get when you're not on the committee that comes up with your title. But having said all that, I'll go on to say that it's somewhat reflective of my past experience because I came to the Piedmont Environmental Council after a long tenure in local government, in which I had a substantial amount of interest in regional planning and in landscape conservation. Today, I and my friend Debbie Spiliotopoulos are going to talk to you about how we have separately been engaged in building partnerships for scenic landscape conservation from the perspective of in my case, from the perspective of a nonprofit organization largely working through private conservation easements, and she through her work with the Northern Virginia Regional Planning District Commission. What I want to do is walk you through our organization and region's process of privately initiated landscape protection, some various partners that we work with consistently and over the years, and some examples and advances that the Commonwealth has made in the last couple of years, largely through the mechanism of the Conserve Virginia program. Virginia's northern Piedmont is an exceptional place. It's located in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains in the west, and the Piedmont is beloved for its beauty, natural resources, ecology, significance to American history, productive family farms, thriving communities, and a vibrant economy, all within easy reach of the Washington Metro DC area, as well as the capital of the former Confederacy, Richmond. The principal vehicle we have used in creating landscape conservation has been conservation easements. These are easements on privately owned land, but that with the addition of the Shenandoah National Park and other state and federal property, the landscape of the 9 counties has 2 million acres, almost half of which is what we're targeting for conservation. And as this slide points out, 427,000 acres of which has already been conserved through that combination of public and private efforts. When a landowner places a conservation easement on a property, the qualifying organization needs to be on the other side of that transaction to be the steward of the property. And these are representative examples of some of those organizations, some of which are state actors: Department of Conservation and Recreation, Virginia Outdoors Foundation, the Department of Historic Resources, and the Department of Forestry. There's also a lot of local governments engaged in this activity, and I mentioned the County of Albemarle there, but there are also a lot of private non-governmental organizations like my own, Land Trust of Virginia, Piedmont Environmental Council, and the Nature Conservancy, among others. Why do landowners conserve their land? The most typical and traditional reason is that property owners want their farms and open spaces to remain intact in the landscape. And often, so I say this jokingly, but quite frankly, it's often true, landowners are more terrified of their children than they are of anybody else and what they're going to do to their property after they're gone. Here's an example: Carolyn Stallnaker at Mount Pleasant Farm, and why she and her family work very hard to conserve their farmland. But fundamentally, conservation easements result from private property owners' decisions and commitments to maintain that property in the future. It keeps working lands working for the long term, foster continued use of good management practices in the future, and there's a greater benefits to the broader community, such as protecting wildlife habitat, water quality, historic resources, and scenic viewsheds. What does a conservation easement do? And I apologize to those of you who have participated in a couple of the previous sessions yesterday and the day before involving some of my colleagues, both Kat Imhoff and Dan Holmes, all of whom, as I watched their programs, I realized I was going to have to self-edit a bunch of my slides because they were stealing a lot of my thunder and talking about what conservation easements do. But in case some of you didn't attend, I will try to run through that quickly. Conservation easements are flexible. They basically are tailored to meet the owner's vision for their property. They typically limit subdivision and incompatible uses. They often will incorporate best management practices like forest stewardship or riparian buffers along streams, which is of particular interest, I know, to this audience. What else is in an easement? There's limits on number and possibly the size of houses and accessory structures. They prohibit industrial or commercial uses, and there's usually a bunch of legal standards that have to satisfy the IRS. But the IRS in Virginia tax credit program has a lot to do with this, and the tax code provides a charitable deduction for the donation of a conservation easement, so that there are some basic requirements, as do those properties applying for Virginia's tax credit. IRS requirements typically say the donation must have some public benefits, such as protect scenic or open space, an enormous concern in our landscape. Protect relatively natural habitat for fish and wildlife. Protect historically important land or certified historic structures, or preserve land for recreation by the public. And this last standard is one that is increasingly coming to the fore as a tangible, real investment by the public in private property conservation efforts. Increasingly, private property has to have a public interest in the conservation thereof, and there's a broader public policy in play. Large landscape conservation and public recreation and tourism access are and can increasingly become part of a compatible set of interests. We're going to start a little bit an example here in Orange County, Virginia, and how the layers of these conservation values come into play. Orange County is in the southeastern part of PEC service region, and there's an iconic historic property many of you are probably familiar with, James Madison's Montpelier, where you can visit the small library on the second floor on the left-hand side there, which looks out under the portico. And the landscape is pretty much the same as Madison saw it, preserved through conservation easements on still privately owned lands. But also conserved is the Freedman's Cabin, the Gilmore Cabin, located just beyond that landscape, as unfortunately so many tangible remnants of the landscape of human bondage so often were. We're trying to lift those up and make sure that story is told as well. But Orange County is rich in a great many other cultural, historic, scenic, and agricultural resources. Here's a map of Orange County, sort of the landscape view. You can see Culpeper, Madison, and Greene sort of to the north and west, Albemarle, Louisa, and Spotsylvania to the south. That won't mean much to a lot of you who are not from Virginia, but if you look, there's one major primary road running east-west through the property, through the county, Route 20, and a couple of primary roads running roughly north-south, Route 3 in the far east, Route 522 in the center, and in the west, Route 20. None of these are enormous roads. Route 3 is the only one of those that's consistently a four-lane road. But in this county, there is a bunch of National Register historic sites, and we've mapped them thus. There are a bunch of Virginia designated scenic byways mapped thus. There's the Madison Barber Rural Historic District, reflective of the great history that Orange County has in the founding fathers. There's also a lot of Civil War battlefield study areas incorporated in the county. There's also prime agricultural soils, and this is a generalized map for the purposes of this discussion. There's also conservation easements, which again is the principal focus of my conversation with you today. And you can see there's a lot of correlation, in fact, 100% correlation with those values that have already been mapped. There's also a local government regime of land use planning where the local government decides what they want the county to look like in the future. And by and large, the conservation values that have been reflected in the past are reflected in what the county wants to see for its future. You can see them here overlaid. So there's some growth projected around the town of Orange, and there's some growth projected in the far eastern part of the county. And in none of those places is there a strong overlap with already conserved lands. They're basically places that can develop and they can still manage for their future without clashing with these conservation values. In fact, one tends to facilitate the other. I want to talk about an example in Orange County, which is a great example of how public-private partnerships have been built. The Montpelier-Grelin Trail, and now what's coming is the Gordonsville Town to Trail project, which is an outgrowth of it. Montpelier, obviously, is the home of one of our founding fathers, James Madison, but it's immediately adjacent to a substantial native plant nursery owned by a company called Grelin, titled Grelin Nursery. And both of them had a trail network that they were developing. And as frankly was obvious to both parties, it made great sense to try to connect those two. Originally, it was a 14-mile trail network. It's growing in the Southwest Mountains. It links both the historic James Madison's Montpelier with the working farm of Grelin, and there's restrooms, cafes, and shops at both ends to provide economic development tourism opportunity to Orange County. Here's roughly a map showing what that looks like. Again, up into the sort of north there's a star that indicates that there's James Madison's Montpelier, the trail network that Grelin developed, and then the eventual connection and the loop that connects it down to Grelin Nursery down in the southwestern side of the property. All these trails and networks were created with cooperation of both parties and with the Commonwealth. The trail was originally established, or the connection was originally established in spring of 2015 to connect these existing trails, and it was designated as a Virginia treasure in spring 2016 thereafter. That's First Lady Dorothy McAuliffe with very motivated and well-connected partners who are out enjoying the trail. The trail is growing. You see the inception sort of there with the existing network in 2014, then 15, 16, 17, and the goal ultimately is to get a total of 25 miles of accessible trails to the public to connect both Orange, town of Orange rather, Montpelier, Grelin, and then eventually to the town of Gordonsville, which we'll look to next. The tourism measure can't be overstated. Prior to the pandemic, Montpelier averaged about 71,000 visits annually. The visits have exploded over the last year, although I can't honestly give you an updated number because we don't have that field tested yet, but it's increased substantially. Montpelier and the Grelin Trail has also had an economic impact. Look at the amount of tourism dollars that have been spent in both those places. Here's where they fit into the landscape. Again, the little town of Orange is to the upper right, and the town of Gordonsville, both of these in Orange County, I beg your pardon. What a complete brain futz there. Montpelier and Grelin in the middle, but the idea is connect all those places together. North to Orange and south to Gordonsville. So that, again, where we are at the moment and where that extension will come is that light green on the far right column. And this was started pretty actively in 2016. UVA School of Architecture conducted the planning charrette in the town of Gordonsville. Town of Gordonsville has a couple of small downtown public parks that were sort of in need of love. They also had sort of a history of segregation and problematic relationships with the communities around them. PEC has purchased several properties now to add to that town park network and to connect it to the Fireman's Carnival grounds, which are immediately adjacent. That's going to be building out in the coming years, and the Commonwealth's been a big partner in that, in Virginia Land Conservation Funds to support it. That trail is going to not only connect Gordonsville itself with some other recreation opportunities within it, but is ultimately going to connect through the Town to Trail project to connect to Grelin and Montpelier. Both this project and the next I'm going to talk about have significant private philanthropic capital and substantial investments by the Commonwealth through such programs as the VLCF, the BOF, Virginia Outdoors Foundation, as well as the federal government through NRCS partnerships to get these projects done. I want to talk briefly about a fairly new tool from the Commonwealth to identify conservation priorities called Conserve Virginia. Conserve Virginia identifies 803,000 acres in the PEC region. Again, that's 2 million acres. So the Conserve Virginia model has identified 803,000 acres as Virginia's highest conservation value lands. My friend Parker Agelesto talked yesterday about how the Conserve Virginia model is trying to identify the top 10% conservation values in the state. So you can see that a lot of them are in this part of the state. But already of that 803,000 acres proposed to be of high value for conservation, 213,000 acres have already been conserved, or 26% of that number. PEC and other land trusts were consulted and invited to offer commentary on the development of Conserve Virginia. Currently consists of 21 data sets grouped into 7 categories. While scenic preservation is considered, that layer currently consists of only of designated scenic rivers, designated Virginia byways, and national trails, and a 200-foot buffer on either sides of those. I think we can all agree that 200-foot wide view shed, for instance, on the Shenandoah National Park on the Skyline Drive hardly captures what people are really looking at. And we feel this is critically important because 90% of Virginians report that views are why they travel and why they do tourism opportunities. There's got to be an upgrading of this layer of Conserve Virginia, but it's a good work in progress. I want to talk a little bit about Madden Farm, which is, it's actually in Culpeper County, but very adjacent to Orange County, but it's part of the overall landscape. The Conserve Virginia model and mapping helps to identify funding priorities by documenting the various conservation values. And I'll share an example with Madden Tavern, which is now fully funded, and we're very excited about that. It is a 348-acre property in Culpeper County located in the Chancellorsville Battlefield Study area, so that's one layer of value. It's leased for commodity-level crop production. It's got 87% of its prime and statewide significant soil, so that's another value. It also is a historically African-American property immediately adjacent to the family's originally and already conserved Madden's Tavern, a free Black establishment developed before the Civil War. It was frequented both by Union and Confederate soldiers during the war, and it was the site where some of the first U.S. colored troop regiments were organized. So it's very important at a lot of historical levels. It's a rare relic of pre-Civil War Black entrepreneurship in rural Virginia. They were freedmen before the Civil War and remained so after. It's listed on the National Landmarks Register and the National Register. It's an area rich with African-American history, and the tavern, farmland, and Black church and cemetery all are part of that landscape, and all are or will be conserved through this effort. Madden's Taverns, if you look at that map, which is a map produced by our mapping staff in our office, shows that all these different types of soils, all these different parcelizations, put it really terribly at risk for breaking up and losing its value as a coherent story. It's adjacent to already 4,000 acres of conserved land in Glen Mary Farm, and that'll solidify the connection to a number of other landscape resources and water quality improvements that need to be made for this area. So the conserved Virginia values involved here were cultural and historic preservation as a result of the battlefield, habitat and ecosystem diversity. Freshwater mussels are present in Mountain Run, which is part of the property, an underserved tributary to the Rappahannock, and flooding resiliency on the area of that run as well. So lots of landscape conservation values that are tied to scenic resources, but are not necessarily defined solely by those scenic resources that Conserve Virginia helps us document and put into place. So here's an example of what this kind of effort took. An estimated fair market value of the conservation easement on this property is $1 million. NRCS and the ALE program put in $500,000. VLCF cash contribution of $300,000, and PEC raised $200,000 separately. So this is a partnership without which this would not have happened. There was no way it could have happened. So Conserve Virginia, if used correctly by all the various partners, can be a critical organizing focus for many groups: historic, agricultural, water quality, and a wealth of other goals. A disciplined process of adding to it more depth and other values like scenic resources will help it be a benchmark for conservation in the nation. I put a link on this slide, which you'll see that you can take a look at the Conserve Virginia process and look at all the narrative about how it came to be. But it's a pretty exciting opportunity for Virginia to grow its conservation. We're using it ruthlessly in our region, and I would encourage other groups to look at your states and try to find ways that you can facilitate that and get it in place in your communities as well. I am going to turn it over now to my colleague and friend Debbie, who's going to talk about an effort she's involved with in Northern Virginia, and we'll both hang around for questions should you have them at the end. So Debbie, over to you. Assuming I can stop sharing and I can demonstrate competence in that at least. Done.
Great. I think I took it from you. Great. Okay. Hi, everybody. I am Debbie Spiliotopoulos, and thank you so much for letting me be a part of this really amazing symposium. I'm a senior environmental planner for the Northern Virginia Regional Commission, which is a planning district northeast, due east of where John was just talking. I was just in a really great presentation where it was about accessibility, and they described every slide what the images were, and I thought it was really cool. So if it's annoying, I apologize, but I'm gonna try it out. So this is just a photo of Leesylvania State Park in Prince William County, which is part of the area I'm gonna be talking about. NVRC is the regional planning district in Northern Virginia, and we represent 13 jurisdictions and 2.5 million people. Our region includes the counties of Arlington, Fairfax, Loudoun, and Prince William, the cities and towns of Alexandria, Herndon, Leesburg, Vienna, Manassas Park, and others. This is all basically the suburban ring outside of DC. I work with two other key partners on the trail in my organization, Corey Miles, who has led the scenic inventories that I'll be talking about, as well as water access efforts. And Jill Caniff, who is a GIS analyst and demographer, who's developed some of the story maps and will be working on some of the other analyses. I've taken the lead on partner coordination agreements and leading some construction and design projects that we received through grants. The group meets monthly with land managers and advocates working in smaller groups on projects on an ad hoc basis. And there we go. So most of our work on trails and scenic viewsheds has involved the Potomac Heritage National Scenic Trail. We have an agreement with the National Park Service and have worked with NPS actually to initially designate the Potomac Heritage Trail as a National Historic Scenic Trail. It's one of 11 nationally designated trail systems in the country, running from the northern neck of Virginia up through southern Maryland and ending in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The trail corridor runs on both sides of the river as a braided network. It's complete on the Maryland side because it's overlain by the C&O Historic Park and the, oops, sorry. I have two screens going. And the Cumberland and Great Allegheny Trail in Maryland and Pennsylvania into Pittsburgh. We are not a landholding agency, and we act to convene and support interagency efforts and provide research, and we're funded by a cooperative agreement with the National Park Service. And just so you can see on the right is the map of the Potomac Heritage National Scenic Trail. So this is a map from our website. The trail in Northern Virginia. The trail follows about 100 miles of the Potomac River, as well as having loops into some of the different tributaries. And when completed, it will be over 120 miles of trails within the region in a braided network. And it's a combination of multi-use, recreational hiking, and equestrian trails and loops. These designations are all determined by the localities, the land managers. Alignment of in Northern Virginia also includes a number of gaps due to a lot of different landowners and as well as private land. Northern Virginia, we provide services to coordinate across the boundaries and promote trail completion, and use within the region. And trail use within the region. We work with federal partners, including National Park Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Land Management, the U.S. Army, the Marines, and the National Trust for Historic Preservation, Mount Vernon Ladies Association, as well as local staff and regional local park authorities. Most of the alignments are publicly owned, and any private segments that have public easements are coordinated by the local staff. We don't interfere with those relationships because we don't have a lot of authority. So there we go. So NVRC's role. We support state outdoor recreation planning, which is a critical need that has not kept up with the region's growth over the last few decades. This has led to congestion and maintenance issues with our existing facilities. Demand in the past year has been explosive, as probably all of you have found. People have reported between 50 and like 300% increases in usage. But even before that, we had a real challenge as our region has grown in the last 25 years. We've grown about 450,000 people. So that's like a whole new county laid upon a very small area of the state. We have 1.1 of the 2.6 million residents in our region live within 5 miles of the trail of the Potomac, and 2 million live within 10 miles in Northern Virginia. With a focus on coordination and technical assistance, NVRC provides a number of regional activities, including documenting scenic inventories. We created a public water access inventory, and we are currently creating regional information on the regional role of parks and trails with their trail access to health. We are also going to be creating a regional corridor analysis, updating a corridor analysis in the coming year. So all these tools are used to support land managers in funding, completing, and promoting the trail, thinking beyond their boundaries. And I hope that these efforts, I hope to share these efforts of how we've tried to engage and strengthen trail partnerships and also bringing people together. We're pretty much, I think, the only group that's bringing these different people who may be the only person in their organization that's working on these issues to be able to talk beyond their boundaries. So in this slide, before I go ahead, this is Neabsco Creek, which is about a mile off of Route 1 in Woodbridge, which is not like the most beautiful road in the world. And this is just glorious. And down below it is a boardwalk, which is, I think, almost a mile-long sinuous boardwalk between Ripon Lodge, which is a county historic site, and Leesylvania State Park. And NVRC was involved, and we were the sponsor for the funding for the engineering study. So getting into scenic inventories, I'm going to give credit again to Corey Miles, my colleague who takes the lead on these activities. I enjoy going along and being one of the people reviewing, and I know that Lynn has also joined us on this at least once. Today, we've mapped 13 or 14 view sheds. We have a story map, an interactive map on our website, which I hope to share during this presentation. And we plan to do more in-depth scenic analyses later once we have this upcoming dashboard put together. The goal is to identify which views are important and why, and if the information is not available, there's no way to argue for it, especially with the development pressures and growth pressures that we have in the region. So I'm going to share a few examples. This picture right here is a lovely crossing at the town of Occoquan into Fountainhead State Park, Regional Park. And it's one of the few pedestrian bicycle crossings between Fairfax County and Prince William County to the south. This is Occoquan is a really cute town. If you ever are stuck in traffic on 95, I highly recommend getting off and going and shopping or getting a snack or something. And it's got a great arts, food, historic center, and it's within the Potomac Heritage Corridor. It's also a trailhead for the East Coast Greenway, the Route 1 Bikeway, the Occoquan Water Trail, and the Fairfax County Cross County Trail. And it's also, because it's a link also to a number of significant parks, it's really a trailheader kind of town. The bridge that you would take originally blocked the view. It was, in poor condition. And so I'm just showing to the right that by just making a change in the railing when they did it added a whole new value to this crossing. And on the left corner, the picture kind of gives an overview. So when you're driving over 95, getting out of Fairfax, going into Prince William, leaving DC, going south, you'll see this cute little town off to the side, and it's definitely worth a visit. We have that's the nice thing about Northern Virginia is we do have a lot of secrets that people just don't know about. We always think about this, we always think about the kind of the fact that we're so suburban and urban, but it's really, we have some beautiful locations. So, okay, now I'm going to show you an example of Lake Montpelier. This is a successful scenic protection that NVRC takes absolutely no credit for. This is Mount Vernon, and which is another feature of along the Potomac Heritage Trail. The Mount Vernon Ladies Association has maintained the view from George Washington's home to match where he lived through scenic easements, purchases, and parkland in Maryland. So you're looking over at Maryland right there. And we're also lucky because much of the Maryland side is parkland, national park and local park. So now I'm going to show you some of the ones that locations that we've done analyses for. This is Jones Point Lighthouse and Jones Point Park, and another location in Alexandria. This is part of the view that you're seeing in the larger picture is a view from the George Washington Parkway. This is in Alexandria, north of Mount Vernon. And the GW Parkway runs from Mount Vernon to Great Falls. It's a national park. There's a lovely trailway, a greenway. It's a nice bike route. It's very, very heavily used. And from this vantage point on the left, okay, I did big circles so you guys can see them. In the yellow circle, there's this little white dot, and that is Jones Point Lighthouse. It's a historic lighthouse, and it's a really cool place to go because it has a bunch of boundary stones that were set by Benjamin Banneker, who is the person who he's the person who surveyed the whole DC area, African American, and he worked with George Washington. And at this spot, you can see where Maryland, Virginia, and DC all come together. I'm kind of a map nerd, so I think that's really cool, but it's a really beautiful little pastoral spot. But then you see that giant red oval, that is Woodrow Wilson Bridge, which is a huge artery for traffic into DC and into Prince George's County, Maryland from Virginia. And then this, right next to the tree, there's this giant kind of structure. That is National Harbor, which is a big development and casino. So though this viewpoint has been marred, I think that it's also an example of how the localities and the states of Virginia, Maryland, and the district have generated some really great multi-use and actually probably brought more interest to the Jones Point Historic Site. Because as they were planning this, first of all, there's a really great multi-use crossing at the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. So you can actually, you do not only need to do it by cars. And underneath in this middle picture, they used underneath the span to create this bike traffic garden, which I don't know how much you all know about those, but those are amazing because they can teach kids and adults and everybody. It's a place to learn to ride your bike, but also to learn about the rules of the road and safe biking. And then the bottom picture, which I apologize for the weird angle of it, but that was just when we were doing the view shed, the massive number of people. It was like a Tuesday, I don't know, during the school day at like 11, and there were just tons of people using this park. And you just walk 100 yards and there you are at Jones Point. So I don't know whether other people have noticed this, but there's a real lack of interest. There's not as much interest on the historic side as there is demand for the recreation. So this is maybe a way to get some overlap into that. And it's just an interesting example, I thought. So next, these are some of the other inventories we did. So the upper one is part of the north of Alexandria on the GW Parkway again. And this is, again, you see the beautiful parkland and you're getting a really nice view. Alexandria is a very old city and has beautiful historic. It's another one of our, Old Town Alexandria is another one of our beautiful alignments. And really the whole city is considered part of the Heritage Trail. But you look across and there is I think this is another casino, some big development that in Maryland that has no bearing on, you know, the view shed from here. The bottom photo is a new Virginia State Park in Western Loudoun County, which will offer a connection to the Appalachian Trail and it's also an alignment that can connect to Harper's Ferry. And in the yellow circle, you'll see some cell power lines. And I think that where the power lines are, there is some consideration for more development. And I know you all are getting loads of really great technical information, but this is one of those places where by documenting it, at least the information is there that there is a need for a scenic view related to how they do any development. And we have all this on an interactive map that if we have time, I'll share later, and I'll go faster. I feel like I'm talking too long. So in 2018 and 2019, we did a public water access study. And as you can see, we've had 64 parks, over 14,000 acres of open space on the river. And water access, public water access has been a priority for the open space and recreation plan in Virginia, and especially Northern Virginia, for a number of years. And then these are some of the outcomes or next steps that we plan to do with that. That was a preliminary analysis. So we're looking at both facility and access to sites. And I will, yes, I will, I saved it on my, I just saw the note about pasting the story map. I will definitely, I think I have it ready to go. I can see if it'll work right now. That's the water access plan right there. So hopefully that'll be helpful. So our current efforts, I'm really excited about. Right now, we are working with a consulting firm, BBC, to develop a methodology and analysis on the health, equity, transportation, and economic benefits for completing the Potomac Heritage Trail in Northern Virginia, including a couple of case studies of specific gaps. We're hoping that by doing this, it'll be a methodology that can be replicated throughout the state and for other projects. And the two tentative gaps we're looking at, one is like an 18-mile signature project that Loudoun County is looking into, and the other will be a very small scale goal. And we're providing all sorts of health opportunity indices, like all sorts of really great resources that are available. So we're hoping to have that completed by September. And then later this year, we're planning to update our 2016 corridor analysis, which is one of the things that you can find on our website, including incorporating the other studies into an interactive dashboard. So all these studies, I just sent you 3 links of different things. We're going to be overlaying everything and making it into a dashboard and having some analysis in there and training. A lot of our work, I think, is useful, both almost more as a tool for the public and people than, a way to go out and find a route to hike or anything like that. So those are our 2 things. And then our reference, here are the references, and I can take you. Do we have time for me to take?
You're fine on time. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm going to take you all to, I have it open. So I'm going to new share. I think I can do this. Let's see if it works. Do you see it? Do you see a map?
Yep.
Cool. It worked. Okay, so this is the map, and this is in the links I sent to you all. And I will also cut and paste Corey and Jill's information as well. The 3 of us really tag team on this project. So if you're really interested in the data of like what indices are we using for this analysis, you can go to Jill. If you're really interested in the view shed and some of the water access, you can go to Corey. Oops, sorry. So this is kind of our site. You can see the water access points. If you zoom in, this is Algonquian Regional Park, which is a really nice park. If you zoom in, you can see where the trail alignment is, and you can also see the shoreline, what the shoreline buffer is. And I think it gives us some more information. Oh, I guess that's it. The other, this is our website. So the other thing we have is, this is the water access site. And we have a number of other elements in here. We also have some videos of webinars we did. I think this is a different one. This is the same one. Sorry. We have also, here it is, Enjoy the View is our view shed. And so right now these are they're separate and rudimentary, but we're really looking forward to creating a dashboard and then building on that as we go. So this is the 13 locations we did. This is Cockpit Point, which is a Confederate area, I think, where they were trying to impact the blockade, the blockade of the city in Civil War. And then this is a photo of it, and then it provides information. Oops, I went too far, sorry. So it's this really high bluff. Right now, it's very hard to get to it, but there's going to be greater access soon. And then this is Gunston Hall, which is George Mason's home. This is Veterans Park, which is right behind me. Different photo, but you might recognize it. And then this is Algonquian. And we're going to plan to do some scenic analyses associated with this as well. This is Kephart Landing up in Loudoun County. So I hope that that's helpful. And that's, I think that's all I have. So I'm going to stop sharing. Lynn, we can't hear you.
Debbie, could you briefly go over for the rest of the audience what protocols you're using for your scenic analysis?
Oh, yes, thank you. So we use the National Park Service approach, and Corey did a 3-day training, I think with you, Lynn, right? Were you part of that?
Maybe.
You don't remember? Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
But it's a whole bunch of sheets of paper. It is like the best part of, no, it's number 2 on the best part of my job. The very best part of my job is, here, I'll show, I'm going to share my screen again with my last thing. So that's the best part of my job right there, is that we get to go out and like do ground truthing, which I'm sure a lot of you guys get to do. That's actually at Fort Belvoir, looking at Mason Neck. But it's a whole series of things where you're evaluating. You get to feel like an art critic because you're evaluating the vertical and horizontal elements and the color scheme and how it would change over time and what are the, foreground, background elements, like what is the real focal point. Most of our sites don't really have a focal point because you're just in this beautiful spot, right? And there's things all around you. But and then there's a way where you have to have at least two people doing this, and then you kind of turn that kind of subjective set of views into an objective kind of a number. And that's how you figure out kind of the scenic value. So some of those little things that I had circled are real problems. They're not big problems, but they get to add it into that and to help with the protection.
Great. So for those of you who are here, as was stated early, you can put a question in the chat box, or there's such a small number, you can go ahead and turn on your screen and mics if you have any other questions. It seems like I had another one for you, but I can't remember what it was right now. There were a couple of questions I had for John that are in the chat box, and he's addressed those quite well. And I think that we have about 5 more. Well, we actually have like 15 more minutes. So we have, both of you talk so fast. You covered so much material. I'm so impressed. But I could see where, there might be other questions.
Well, I'm gonna add in sort of an entreaty to everybody out there that works, doesn't currently work with easement holding organizations. And that is that probably the central thing I was trying to convey with my commentary was nobody gets a whole lot done by themselves. You have to be open to partnerships with other people. We've gotten, just by force of circumstance, having to try to find ways to partner with private property owners. That was sort of our bread and butter. But as things got more complicated and land values crept up and the different layers of the public's interest in property manifested itself in different ways, particularly if you're going to provide recreational access, you got to get other people involved, state agencies, the federal government, local governments, but also, community groups that just care about things. And yeah, it's messy. It is. I'd love to be able to say we're applying great metrics. We're doing the best work. We're applying all the money to those things, but you got to be open to the opportunism of finding people who really are passionate about something and harnessing that interest. Debbie does a great job talking about all the different people. The notion of that boardwalk, which I think won an award from the Governor's Environmental Award for Excellence in the last couple of years, within a half mile really of Route 1. And I can tell you, as somebody that has driven Route 1 off and on for the better part of my adult life, you don't think about things like that being near Route 1. If it's not a big box, it's a burnt out big box is what often is the case on Route 1. So that is tremendous. And that could not have happened by any one person saying, I'm going to make it happen. It's by one person saying, I want to find people who care about this and work together to make it happen. So I applaud Debbie for doing that work. And the transportation folks always are willing to talk. You find a way to find a win for everybody, you can get a whole lot done. So be open to those partnerships is the biggest thing I'd convey.
And I feel like being a group probably like PEC or NVRC, I think there's a hassle factor for a lot of staff with working with the public. And there's a process for working with the public, but we're kind of loosey-goosey. We're not anybody. So we'll talk to anyone that's interested and include them in projects. So, wherever we can. So I think that I really have to reinforce, I agree with what you said, John, because I think wherever it is, you got to find whoever's interested. I mean, sometimes I feel like so many people don't even know what's going on that if someone has interest, we got to nurture that.
Absolutely.
Because, but that's great. I was wondering, John, I had a question for you. Like, what tools do you feel best resonate with like your land landholders when you're trying to move forward?
Well, I joked about the notion about parents being terrified of what their kids are going to do with the property. It's partially true. I mean, people who have got, particularly my experience has been particularly people with a third or fourth or fifth generation family farm, and the kids are not going to farm it. They might use it as a weekend place. They might come out there, but people who are working the soil for generations care about it. I mean, I think farmers are some of the strongest conservationists out there if they can be shown a way to find a way to recapitalize their farming operation, satisfy the legitimate concerns of their heirs, and preserve that landscape for future generations. I mean, the loss of farmland has become so acute, and the food shortages that came out of the pandemic, not so much because there was less food available, but because the supply chains broke down all across this country, are such that local food production, I think, is more and more in people's mind as an important value. And if you don't have the working farms that can produce food, you're going to be in trouble. And so the narrative has been easier. The public by and large says, yeah, we should invest in farmland conservation coming out of the pandemic. But the thing that resonates with property owners, with those people who are having to commit to this and giving up, they're giving up a significant portion of their asset value to do this, is I want this to continue in some form. I want it to be able to continue in some form. And even if it's not necessarily their kids, but somebody else can use it and will do it as a farm, that's a compelling story. And with hundreds of thousands of acres put under conservation easement for that purpose, families giving up a significant amount of their asset value, clearly it resonates with them. So,
are you finding any benefits? Are you seeing people recognizing the benefits of having trails? Like, for a long time, there was a lot of NIMBYism about having a trail right near you, and you're creating all these new trails in the Piedmont. I mean, are you seeing any change?
It's funny. Often the property owners who have pure homes near these trails are a little sketchier than, are a little more dubious, for instance, than I would say the business owners at either end of them. The experience of Montpelier and Grelin has been such that now when we talk to folks in Gordonsville about the Town to Trail project and eventually connecting that to those trails, they look at the revenues that have been produced by tourism of people coming to enjoy those trails. They're on board. The business community is on board. They get it. The tourism promoters, the people who are interested in having bike and pedestrian trails to recreate and enjoy. Sometimes the people who have, frankly, expensive houses nearby a trail are like, I don't really want to see people walking by, my house. I get that. We try to mitigate those kind of impacts. We try to manage them as much as possible. We need right of way from a lot of those private property owners. So there's usually a way to manage it, but I'm not going to go kumbaya on you here. You've seen it. There are problems with people who are just they're not going to bend. And that's, you got to find ways around it.
So John, when you're talking to people about that, do you all enter into the discussion, the landowner liability law that we have in Virginia, since it's one of the best in the nation, and how effective is that in that conversation?
Yeah, the safe harbor that Virginia provides both for farm production, and allowing people on your farm to see those farm activities, to participate in your agribusinesses, and the protections they provide to private property owners who allow recreational access, as you say, are some of the best in the nation. They are a great selling point. In addition to which, Virginia is not the most litigant-friendly tort liability environment. So, I mean, we can't represent anybody that you won't get sued because, nuisance lawsuits do exist, but the successful rate of such lawsuits are so vanishingly small that, sure, we do bring those into the conversation. We talk about how, it's going to be an easement. There's going to be somebody that holds that easement typically over the property, whether it's a parks department or a new authority that you create for that trail system. But there's always that little hint of, but I might get sued. And I certainly have to tell you, this is America. Everybody seems to get sued sooner or later. I can't tell you you're not going to get sued, but in Virginia, it's a pretty tough hill to climb.
So just to reiterate before your Montpelier to Glenn, is that an authority that's been created with that, or is it?
At the moment, it's just Grelin and Montpelier with a private operating agreement. As we are expanding to try to connect to Orange and Gordonsville at the two extremes, we're having that conversation with Orange County. Do you want a parks authority? Do you want a separate freestanding, private nonprofit organization? I'll be candid with you. Organizations like ours don't want to be running a trail system in one of our 9 counties. That's not logical. It doesn't make sense. So we have to figure out what the right structure is on that. But we now have philanthropic capital, and as I observed in my presentation, the Commonwealth investing in the trails, in the parks part of this. So if there's a way we can start to cobble those pieces together, as an attorney I once employed once said, if you agree about the money, everything else will follow. So.
Well, thank you all very much. We've got a little bit of time, so I have a couple of announcements, unless there's a last statement either of you would like to make.